Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back here in Tampere, and thanks to Antti and Pertti and also Jürgen, wherever he is, for organizing this course. Well, I should start by saying that everyone's interested in what's going on in Finland at the moment with these upcoming pilots, and this has actually already left some traces also in Swedish discussions about basic income. So it'll be great to talk more with you guys informally after the lecture about your impressions of this ongoing development. Now, I mean, in Swedish debates, the most striking thing when you compare discussions in Sweden and Finland on basic income is that it's so much more established in mainstream political discussions here in Finland. Most people in Sweden have a very prejudiced idea about basic income, what it's all about in Sweden. And most economists dismiss the idea very lightly. But more recently, quite a few have referred to what's going on in Finland and been perplexed by, they're actually taking this thing seriously, and perhaps we should have a closer look at these ideas. So, but I'm not here to talk about the Swedish discussions or non-discussions about basic income. I'm here to talk about the relationship between social justice and basic income. And I will take as my starting point in this analysis the book I wrote a few years ago on this topic, Basic Income Reconsidered. It was published with Palgrave in 2012. And these are the main themes that I would like to cover in today's lecture. I'll start by just talking briefly about the definition of basic income to make sure we're all talking about the same thing here and why it deserves our attention. I will then move on to talk about roles and the difference principle, but I'll be rather brief in my treatment of the difference principle, in part because I don't think that the difference principle, which is, the most famous of all principles of social justice, really provide us with any clear guidance with respect to the moral status of basic income. The more important and more fundamental concerns, I will argue, are based on considerations about the basic liberties and the social basis of self-respect. That's where I think we can establish an important connection between these fundamental concerns and the basic income policy, so what I will argue. So that's what I have in mind when I talk about first things first. These basic liberties, being able to effectively exercise your basic liberties with a lively sense of self-worth, self-respect. These are the things that generate the most compelling, in my view, argument for basic income from the point of view of social justice. Of course, we will also need to address the exploitation objection, which is the most important and I think powerful objection to basic income from the point of view of social justice. And I will finally discuss some of the practical implications of these philosophical considerations. And feel free to interrupt me. Of course, I have my structure here, but if there's anything that you don't follow, or if I'm too fast or whatever, feel free to say so. Okay, so in addressing these questions, basic income, I do not deviate from the standard definition of basic income. What I have in mind when I talk about basic income is the idea that we should provide the same nominal payments to rich and to poor on an individual basis. So these payments, they are not directed to the household units, not to families, but to individuals. There is no means tested attached to the basic income. And perhaps more controversially, there's no behavioral conditionality attached to the basic income. There's no work requirements. There's no work test. There is nothing in the definition of basic income, as I see it, to require that it's high enough to satisfy basic needs. But the idea that I will have in mind when I talk about basic income is that as a long-term aspiration, we should aim for what Carol Pateman talks about in terms of a modest but decent standard of living. So the idea that I will have in mind is that we should have the basic income at a level that would enable us to phase out the means-tested social assistance that would make these kinds of transfers redundant. These transfers that aim to provide that basic standard of living. Of course, there are many reasons to approach these discussions to talk about the basic income proposal. And one of the most important ones, of course, is that we've seen a general tendency of the past few decades in the direction of increasing socioeconomic inequalities. But also, there has been a return of mass unemployment in many countries, and as a result of this widespread exclusion from these non-stigmatizing forms of social insurance that are typically based on people's prior labor market attachment. Now, for instance, in Sweden, back in 2002, 81% of unemployed persons were eligible for unemployment benefits. In 2014, this had dropped to 42%. And especially many young people have been affected by these developments. So many people are excluded from social insurance, unemployment insurance, and means-tested benefits have come to play a much more important role. But it's not just that we've seen increasing levels of unemployment, we've also seen new patterns of employment. Patterns of employment have gone through major changes over the past few decades. And we see an increasing share of workers depending on precarious employment, temporary, insecure, discontinuous forms of work. And in addition to this, we also see this increasing concerns about the rise of the robots. How will this affect future labor markets? Automation, digitization, you can see these tendencies. There are science fiction scenarios, there are doomsday scenarios. Many people have strong views about the impact of all this. I think we should be careful about making any clear verdict about this, but clearly it adds to the general uncertainty of the strategy, the traditional strategy of connecting basic security very strongly to people's jobs. And also there is, of course, I think, a legitimate concern here that this affects distributive justice, our commitment to distributive justice potentially negatively. If we cannot find a way to make sure that we can all reap the benefits of technological development, if the profits of this process of technological innovation and robots, if the profits will end up in the hands of the owners of the robots, that is a major concern from the point of view of social justice. So this is just, this is all familiar to you. This is just part of the mainstream discourse about basic income. But with this in mind, I'm drawn to this proposal of a basic income as a systematic, non-bureaucratic, non-stigmatizing form of redistribution. It's a potential instrument for boosting the prospects of the least advantaged. In a spirit of the universal welfare state. Because all this talk about universalism, which is a strong component of the Nordic heritage, the idea of a Nordic universal welfare state, will seem very hollow to very many people today, not covered by these non-stigmatizing forms of social insurance. Now, what I have been focusing on mainly in my research on basic income is social justice. And the reason for addressing this question systematically, the relationship between social justice and basic income, is of course that many people have very strong moral views about the status of basic income. And many people object to the basic income, not necessarily so much on grounds of feasibility or things like that, but because they feel there is a sense that this would be unfair. And of course, there is this, especially this idea that extending income support to adults who are perfectly capable of working, that just seems wrong. And we need to address these kinds of intuitions and the possible principles underlying those intuitions head on. So this is an important task for basic income research, mainly for political philosophers. What should we do with these intuitions? Do they rest on sound foundations? So that's the main topic that I will, for today's lecture, but also of the book that I mentioned, Basic Income Reconsidered. That's the main thing that I'm doing in that book, trying to clarify this relationship. So how do we even approach this task? Well, one obvious suggestion for many people is, many people, when you ask what should we do, is this just or this is not just, many philosophers always have the same response to these questions, namely to ask, what would John Rawls have said? John Rawls, of course, is perhaps, he's the most prominent political philosopher of the 20th century, and he wrote this book, A Theory of Justice, back in 1971. And we should, of course, not treat John Rawls as the god of political philosophy. We should not try, the idea is not to try to decipher the true meaning of what Rawls really meant, and from that draw conclusions about the status of basic income. So that's not the idea I have in mind here. But I think it's very clear. It's such a rich piece of work, that theory of justice and the ideas that Rawls present there, that they provide us with plenty of concepts and theoretical resources to articulate both arguments in favor of basic income and against basic income. And many people appeal to the work of John Rawls, both then to support basic income and to criticize basic income. So, as I already mentioned, the most famous component of Rawls's theory of justice is the so-called difference principle, saying roughly that social and economic inequalities are acceptable only if they help maximize the prospects of the least advantaged. So I'll take that as our starting point for the discussion. An important part of Rawls's argument for this principle, it rests on the view that inequalities of social arrangements, they seem arbitrary from a moral point of view when they are essentially shaped by what he calls natural and social contingencies, circumstances that are completely beyond our control. For example, the family that we were born into, the emotional, intellectual support we were provided with, formative stages of our upbringing. Place of birth. We did nothing to choose our place of birth. It seems arbitrary from a moral point of view that these kinds of circumstances completely beyond our control should have a fundamental impact on our life prospects. On the other hand, Rawls was also sensitive to the potential importance of economic incentives. And that's what strikes many people as appealing about his view, that there is this tendency towards equality, counteracting the impact of brute luck in his theory. But at the same time, there is this recognition that, well, perhaps people need economic incentives in order to be productive. So it provides us with a potential balance here between egalitarian concerns and incentive concerns. We can have this efficiency-sensitive interpretation of the need to impact, to counter the impact of brute luck on the distribution of people's opportunities in life. So I'll get back to these things later on, but for now let us just accept this as a starting point for reflections on social justice and its possible implications for basic income. Now, some people say that, of course, if we accept the difference principle, that must lead us in the direction of embracing basic income. And why is that? Well, if we interpret the difference principle as being concerned with the very lowest income in society, then it seems clear that we should have a very solid income floor, because if some people will fall through the safety nets, clearly those people will have a very low income. So the best way of making sure that the least advantaged in this sense, those with the lowest income, will reach a specified standard is to make sure that people will more or less automatically receive the income needed to reach this standard. And Rawls himself, I mean, around the time when he wrote his book, the idea of a negative income tax was very much in the air. So, and I think it was on page 225 in the Theory of Justice, where he makes a reference to this proposal. I think that's probably a sensible option. In other writings, he has expressed support for job subsidies or alternative strategies. Now, Rawls did not, at least clearly, endorse this conclusion, that we should have an unconditional basic income on the grounds of the difference principle. And why is that? Well, one reason is that in most formulations of the difference principle, he's actually concerned with the life prospects of the least holders of the least advantaged social positions. So he's not necessarily concerned with those having the lowest income in society here and now. What we should be concerned with is the long-term prospects. And by including these notions about social positions, and by talking about what would be the life prospect of representative members of the least advantaged groups, those holding the least advantaged social positions, and by implying that those social positions would be occupations, mainly jobs, he's actually building some rather large cracks into this income floor that might be endorsed by the difference principle. Because if we are focusing very strongly on the life prospects of those with the least advantaged positions, well, it seems that it might be suitable to have some kind of work-related conditionality attached to the social minimum. What would happen if you provide very generous unconditional payments to young people when they are 18 or 19? Wouldn't it be better to give priority to human capital investment? Won't people just spend their days playing computer games or smoking pot? We want people to actually make an effort to find a good education, to make the most of their talents and so on. Perhaps it's sensible to build some conditionality into the safety net, because that will improve people's long-term prospects, their prospects over complete lives. So that's one reason for accepting more conditional options and finding those preferable to the unconditional basic income. And by building this notion of representative members of the least advantaged group, well, perhaps there are some less representative individuals, some exceptions falling through the safety net. Perhaps we need not bother too much with those from the point of view of the difference principle. So there's no clear verdict, and that's the conclusion of this part of the analysis. Depending on how we interpret difference principle, you can use it for different purposes. It's also a question of, are we focusing solely on income and wealth, or are we also taking other goods into account? For instance, Rawls mentioned the importance of leisure. We should not only be concerned with income, but also leisure. And so some people have made the claim that, well, if we take leisure into account, then surely a basic income would be a good thing, because that could help people bargain for more leisure as part of the typical job, giving better prospects for sabbatical leaves and things like that. So that's yet another consideration to take into account in this complex balancing different primary goods, things that we all need, arguably, irrespective of our specific conceptions of the good life. Okay, so let's now turn to the argument that I find important and compelling, and that I have emphasized the most strongly in my work on this topic. Before the difference principle comes into play in Rawls's philosophy, there are some more fundamental values that must be taken into account. There are certain fundamental requirements that must be satisfied before other things like the difference principle would come into play. And the most fundamental of those requirements is related to the priority of the basic liberties. Now, the basic liberties are things like fundamental civil and political rights, the right to think, speak, and move freely, freedom of association, the freedom to live with whomever we fancy, freedom to accept whatever job we may prefer, but also political rights, political liberties, who we would like to vote for, if we would like to be politically active, even candidate for a political, be a candidate for a political party or something like that. All of these things are covered by the basic liberties. These are fundamentally important things. But in order for those not only to, people must have these formally. We have them as formal rights. But if they are also to be valuable, if we are going to be able to effectively exercise these basic liberties, then we also need resources. And this was one reason for why, stressed by Rawls, why it's so important with a solid social minimum. And I think one reason for emphasizing this argument is that this seems to be a relatively uncontroversial concern. The difference principle is controversial. People have different views about this. But the basic liberties is something that most people think, yes, this is crucial, this is fundamental. So when we address these issues with the objective to find a more ecumenical discussion, some values that you can embrace, values that you can endorse from the point of view of very different philosophies or theories of justice, it makes sense also strategically to focus on the basic liberties. So there is a connection between the basic liberties and protecting their fair value and the case for a something of social minimum. Should it be unconditional? Well, I think to answer that question, we also need to take self-respect into consideration. Self-respect for Rawls was perhaps the most important of all so-called primary goods. He said that if we lack self-respect, nothing may seem worth doing, or if some things have value for us, we lack the will to strive for it. So when we make a decision about principles of justice, we would wish to avoid at almost any cost the social conditions that undermine self-respect. Now, I believe that there is quite a firm connection to be established here between basic income and these concerns, the basic liberties and the social basis of self-respect. Now, if we ascribe this priority to basic need satisfaction, it clearly becomes a very crucial advantage of the basic income that it's more likely to reach everyone in need. Today, I don't know the situation in Tampere, but I see people in dire need every day. Every morning I go to work, I meet on average five persons begging for money in the streets or in the subway. When I travel around in Europe, I see young women who see prostitution as the only feasible option for making ends meet. And it's very easy to get kind of desensitized when you're exposed to this experience on an everyday basis and lose the sense of proportions. But, I mean, morally speaking, the moral weight of these needs, these concerns. But surely, I mean, any society that allows this to happen systematically is a spectacular failure from the point of view of ensuring that all can effectively exercise their basic liberties with dignity and a lively sense of self-worth. That would be my claim. So, from this point of view, the fact that the basic income is more or less automatic, that would actually reach more or less everyone. This is an important advantage. But we need to say more about the connection between self-respect, the meaning of self-respect, and how that is linked to concerns behind the basic income policy. So, it's not just important from the point of view of self-respect that we actually have the income we need, that we get the income that we need to satisfy our basic needs. But it's also important that we have we have access to a certain level of personal independence in our everyday relationship with others, so that we do not live under conditions of exploitable dependency. Catriona McKinnon is one of those who have analyzed the meaning of self-respect, the Rawlsian notion of self-respect. She emphasizes very strongly the importance of being able to address one another with a non-subservient self-conception. Now, when we have no exit option, no realistic option to withdraw from a social relationship, this clearly may easily silence our propensity to articulate to oneself, but also voice to others our ideals and our complaints. We need always to think about how will those we depend on respond to our concerns. So if we have these, if we share these concerns, it's clearly important that we find ways that we establish a material foundation for people that allows them to walk tall, to look others in the eye, that allows them to express to others their needs and their concerns with strength and confidence. And that is where I think the basic income is a promising option, because it provides this exit option. So it strengthens the bargaining power, or potentially at least can strengthen the bargaining power in decisive ways. And that is something that is important from the point of view of providing this basis for non-subservient self-conception. So, as Philip Pettit puts it, free persons can walk tall and look others in the eye. And it's not clear that all these people who depend on these temporary forms of employment, who always need to be standby, who lack this firm exit option, who lack the material basis for this security, can actually do this, can relate to others in this required way. The precariat, of course, is a very common concept today to describe the conditions of this growing category of people. Now, it's easy to overemphasize the negative aspects of all this. I mean, many people who are drawn to the basic income proposal stress this very strongly, that having the power to say no, having this bargaining power, being able to reject these bad things, not living in conditions of exploitable dependence, and not being vulnerable to abuse relating to these conditions of vulnerability, dependency. But of course, it's not just a matter of being able to say no. Carl Widerquist, for instance, has his theory of freedom as the power to say no and links that strongly to basic income. But the point of all this, the point of addressing these, this distributive basis for bargaining power, personal independence, to be able to exercise our fundamental liberties with dignity, is of course that it's attractive as part of strengthening the foundation for establishing good things, positive things, not just avoiding bad things, but providing us with a stronger basis in our everyday lives, in our jobs, in our personal relationships with partners, to make sure that we can actually force others to get the respect we deserve. And that this whole way of thinking is based on the idea that there is firm connection between resources, power, and status. If we don't have this basic power, we are not in a position to demand others to respect us, to provide us with decent working conditions or a good agreement about the distribution of labor in households and things like that. So it's not just about avoiding bad things, it's about facilitating good things in the sense that it provides us not just with the basis for non-subservience, but for also positive social recognition. I mean, if all we had was a very high basic income that provides us with the power to say no, but where that would imply that we would all lead our solitary lives, sitting in our living rooms watching TV, that would not be a promising basis for providing a strong foundation of self-respect, right? What we're looking for, what we should be looking for, is to provide people with a stronger sense of recognition compared to rival arrangements. So one important component of this is, of course, the idea that basic income could provide us with better opportunities for meaningful work or other activities. Because with a basic income in place, we could cut the labor supply for very poor jobs. I mean, kinds of jobs that we regard as just soil-destroying toil, that does not provide us with a lively sense of self-worth in our everyday lives. Jobs where we feel that we're just a nuisance to others, where we're just constantly being bossed around, where we feel like inferiors or the servants of others. The basic income provides people with an opportunity to say no to these kinds of jobs. And from the point of view of self-respect, that is probably a good thing. So this argument, I should also emphasize, it's not just about connecting resources, power, status in our everyday social relationships, our relationships between partners, between employers and employees, but also between citizens. Because if we are to guarantee the fair value of basic political liberties, it's also very important that we can address others on an equal footing, where loyalties are not bought and sold, where we do not live in conditions of exploitable dependency, where we can actually articulate and express our own political views, as I said, with strength and confidence. But it's also very important to look at the particular details of the basic income proposal. Because, as I said before, we could imagine we have a very high basic income, but suppose it does not allow us to top it up with income from other sources. Perhaps it's a very sharp withdrawal rate attached to that basic income, so that when we start earning income from other sources, the basic income will be reduced at a corresponding rate. That kind of arrangement, it's not obvious to me that would be likely to provide this more inclusive, more accessible basis of the recognitional basis of self-respect compared to its conditional rivals. What's attractive with basic income from this point of view is, of course, that it potentially opens up a wider spectrum of available activities, that you can combine the basic income in flexible ways with income from other sources, but also that you can participate in civil society, and then you can, other forms of contribution can be recognized as important. So, I mean, some basic income proponents have this naive idea that if we only have this basic income in place, then we'll see this creative explosion. People will spontaneously start doing all these fantastic things. I think it's very important that we always look very closely at the particular details of the proposal. What does it enable us to do? And to also look at the infrastructure of participation. What concrete opportunities are actually available for people in their neighborhoods? Would it be likely that the basic income actually helps people do all these nice things, bring people together, and to open up, widen the prospects for recognition in the sense that I've been describing? Okay, suppose we think that this is a good, attractive way of thinking about the basic income and why it's attractive, why it's important. Rawls is one of those who expressed some reservations to this idea. And you may wonder why there's so much talk about surfers, this discussion of basic income. And this is due to Rawls. He introduced this example with the Malibu surfers. But what about the surfers? Those who are able to work but just choose to spend their whole days surfing off the beaches of Malibu. They claim an income, but they're just surfing all day. That just seems very unjust. There's something unfair about this type of arrangement. So if we accept what I said so far about the importance of being able to effectively exercise your basic liberties and having these bases of self-respect, then this may suggest that there's an important trade-off here. On the one hand, we have these powerful arguments for unconditional basic income. But there are also demands of responsibility, or sometimes referred to as ambition sensitivity. People need to contribute. So how should we address this objection? Well, there are two main avenues for addressing these widely shared concerns. One is pragmatic. We could simply say that, yes, it's regrettable. There is some potential net exploitation coming out of this basic income arrangement. It allows the voluntarily unproductive to drain the resources and energies of their hard-working fellow citizens. Perhaps this is true, and that is unfortunate. Nevertheless, these other things are so very important, so we should simply think about this as an unavoidable side effect. Yeah?
Yeah, I was only thinking like how it differs about the situation we have right now. Like, for example, the surfer there, I think it's not any different for an ice hockey player who gets millions or anything. So, and I think that would be even better if they both get only the basic income and they're like more equal.
Yeah. Now, of course, what is social contribution? This is an important aspect of this, and that's actually, it's good that you said this, because this is the other. There's another main component of the pragmatic reply, to the exploitation objection. One is to say that, yes, basic income may introduce new forms of exploitation, that's unfortunate, but some drones is simply a cost of freedom. That's Carol Pateman's reply. We should be prepared to pay that cost. But the other relates to what you say.
I'm sorry, I'll ask you to ask questions after the lecture because it's recorded and works better.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, so remember. But the other element of the pragmatic reply is to stress that, okay, so what exactly is contribution? There are many people who contribute enormous amounts of work that are not receiving an income to reflect that contribution in today's arrangement. And it seems like the dividing line between work and leisure becomes increasingly blurry. I mean, do I work? Do I contribute when I spend my evenings trying to start up a new business project? When I work to maintain my contacts, my networks, to be available for work? When I attend courses? When I write a Wikipedia entry? When I care for my elderly relatives by caring for children and taking care of refugees, and so on and so on. Of course, people contribute in very many different ways. And some people will say that by recognizing that social contribution, productive contribution, is something that goes far beyond what's covered by the employment contract, formalized forms of work, basic income will actually be a good way of removing important sources of exploitation in this sense. If we think that exploitation, non-exploitation requires that contributors are also compensated in monetary forms and provided with a basis of personal independence in these things. Okay, so this is the pragmatic reply and the two elements of the pragmatic reply. Social contribution is something that goes beyond employment. Some exploitation is a tolerable price to pay. But there's also a more principled kind of reply that has played an important role in philosophical discussions about basic income and social justice. And this is mainly associated with the work of the Belgian philosopher Philippe van Parijs, who published this magnum opus back in 1995, Real Freedom for All. And as you can see, one of his main targets in this book is to address this surfer, the Malibu surfer objection, the exploitation objection. And what he emphasizes in this work is that, look, we should not think about the basic income as a redistribution of labor income to which some people have these desert-based claims. Rather, we should think about the basic income, he didn't use this expression, but this is what he meant, as a predistribution of resources to which nobody has a justified prior claim. He has later used the expression of equalization of gifts, broadly speaking. So the core intuition of this argument is quite simple. In a similar way to Rawls, Philippe van Parijs regards the economy as a gift distribution machine. Some people receive very much, others receive very little. Not mainly because of what they do, they contribute, but simply because of which particular slot in the economy they happen to occupy, which particular slot in the economy they happen to access, largely due to circumstances beyond our control. So this goes back to what I said initially about the general Rawlsian intuition about brute luck inequalities, circumstances beyond our control. place of birth, which networks we access, the connection between the talents we may have and the available jobs, or the linguistic skills we have or don't have and available jobs. And this line of argument, it also relates to what we mentioned about the robot economy, because I mean, there is an idea about the technological inheritance, that we inherit so much technology, this fantastic productive capacity, all the social infrastructure, all the know-how. If we didn't access this heritage, clearly what we would be able to produce with our abilities would be very little, just a very small fraction of what we actually can produce today. And who deserves this inheritance in a wider sense? So not just what we inherit from our mothers or fathers when they die, but this technological inheritance, this productive capacity of society. Who deserves that? Well, one answer is simply, we should regard this as gifts, things that we receive, and we should be happy that we have these resources available. The problem is not that there are these gift-like resources. The problem is that they are so very unequally distributed. That's the core intuition of Philippe van Parijs's work and his way of interpreting this general notion of gift, this brute luck equalization that plays an important role in the Rawlsian God. Now there are different ways of interpreting and specifying these general notions, but I hope that, the intuition, the general idea is clear. Some people emphasize inherited resources as the core foundation of this, the most important category to which this principle applies. Others emphasize valuable natural resources. Nobody has done anything to deserve a greater share of natural resources than others, and it is claimed in this line of argument, or these authors' use of this general idea. One example could be the Alaska Permanent Fund. I don't know if you've been talking about that in this course, but there's this scheme in place in Alaska where all inhabitants of Alaska are entitled to an annual share, these dividends, the returns from mainly oil assets. So these windfall gains related to natural resources. Others connect this to also environmental taxation, that some take much more than others of what all are equally entitled to. Arguably, if this is correct, this notion of gift equalization. Now, Van Parijs, he has a controversial extension of this argument, that he argues that jobs should be incorporated into this category of assets to which the principle of gift equalization applies. Some people receive very much, others little, due to the job, because of the job they happen to access. So an important component of what we today categorize as income taxation should really be interpreted along these lines, not as a redistribution of labor income, but as a way to seize these gifts, broadly speaking, the unequal extent to which we are able to benefit from this technological inheritance, depending on which jobs we access. Now, Van Parijs, he links this general idea. We can have this in mind when we try to apply this. You can think of inheritance, think of a share of inheritance. Most people probably think that it's up to each to decide what to do with the share of inherited assets. Should you use them to, some people will want to travel around the world and invest in some business project, or we have different views about how best to use share of inheritance. And Van Parijs, he says that in the same way, it's up to each individual to decide how she should make use of the basic income. We should be liberals in this respect. We should respect people's attachment to a wide diversity of values, lifestyles, We have different ideals of the good life. So if we respect people, their freedom to choose to live in different ways, we should respect their freedom to make use of these resources in whatever way they prefer. So he links this. I mean, this leads him to criticize ways of distribution where you earmark access to resources to particular purposes, such as work, employment. So he thinks that traditional social democratic approaches, they're illiberal because they focus so very strongly on the opportunity to work. But if the motive in combating unemployment is not some sort of work fetishism, an obsession with keeping everyone busy, we should prefer the basic income, according to Birnbaum. So this is what I mean by a liberal form of pre-distribution. People should be able to use these resources in different ways. So I think this is a forceful intuition, it's a forceful line of argument. And it has a role to play in the justification of basic income. But my own view is that Van Parijs's theory, it's too strongly focused on resources. His way of, he says that the essence of social justice is, the main requirement is to establish the basis for the highest sustainable basic income. Providing people with the highest sustainable basic income so that they would be free to do whatever they might want to do. That for him is the meaning of real freedom, his interpretation of real freedom. As you remember the title of his book, Real Freedom for All, that is what he has in mind. So my view is not that this is incorrect. I think that kind of argument has a role to play, but it's one-sided. It's one-eyed, because it does not incorporate these considerations that I emphasized very strongly. It says nothing about status, social status. It says nothing about exploitable dependency, about bargaining power, the importance of establishing social relations where we need not bow and scrape to each other, where we do not live in conditions of exploitable dependency, where we can look the other in the eye. These kinds of social status-based considerations, they are not included, they are not incorporated at all in Real Freedom for All. Van Parijs is focusing only on the resources, the competitive value of the resource bundles that individuals control. So it's this libertarian way of thinking, where justice is about providing people with equal bundles of resources and then let people get on with their lives. And then this could imply that people choose and people lose, and we end up in submissiveness or different kinds of social relationships. And that's just fine, because since we are liberals, we should leave people alone. People should be free to do whatever they might want to do, even if this entails relationships of exploitable dependency and these things that I have emphasized. So the main difference between my own view and Van Parijs's view is I have a more pluralistic understanding of the requirements of justice and equality, where I emphasize very strongly these relational status-based considerations. So I don't think that in Philippe Van Parijs's perspective, for instance, we don't have the resources to explain why, for instance, we should have a basic income rather than a basic capital, a lump sum. Because from his point of view, the main concern is clearly to just provide people with resources and then allow them to lead whatever lives they want to lead. It seems to me that the right way to interpret that should be to provide people with lump sum payments, or at least not. I mean, a monthly income stream. It's something completely different than a lump sum payment. So it's difficult with the resources available in his theory to explain that. So I'll leave the things about ostracism. We can get back to that in discussion if you want to, but that's the most important difference between my view and Van Prijs's view. Now this also, and I want to say a few more things about the practical implications of this, because these philosophical disagreements, they are important because they affect concrete political, the political conclusions that we draw from this engagement with theories of justice. Now, if all that matters is to provide people with equal resource bundles of equal competitive value, and to allow people to get on with their lives, to choose whatever they want, what should we think about welfare services? In the Nordic context, where we take much of this for given, that we have subsidized university education, we want to have high quality daycare services, high quality healthcare, and all of these things. Some people think that if we're truly liberals, why shouldn't we just provide people with money that they can use for whatever purposes they might have? Isn't it paternalistic to give people resources in the form of services, in-kind support, instead of monetary payments? And for me, a key component of the response to all this is, surely we need to be concerned with the social status of individuals. This is the relational argument that I've stressed consistently. If, for example, we have this society with very rigid, very traditional gender roles, it might be the case that, suppose we don't have subsidized daycare, we have this traditional, this informal expectations, and we introduce a basic income. Wouldn't that be a gender trap? There's a wide literature on this, and it has been discussed as a potential problem with a basic income. And I would be inclined to agree. Yes, you can clearly see that with some basic income proposals, this could actually happen. But if women would turn out to become the servants of men, or being stuck in very constrained social conditions, this clearly cannot be seen as a policy supportive to the kind of social status that I have emphasized in this lecture. If all we are concerned with is, providing people with individual resource bundles that they should be able to use for whatever purposes they may have, we don't have the resources to explain why this would be objectionable from the point of view of social justice. So I think we certainly need to look beyond this real libertarian framework of Philippe van Prijs. We need to focus on how unconditional payments interact with social ethos, power relationships, social services, and all these things to produce specific opportunity sets for individuals. Now, some people think that it would be fine to have a basic income, an unconditional basic income that is far lower than currently existing means-tested social benefits, because it's more respectful to individuals, it's less paternalistic, it provides people with more freedom. And these freedom-based advantages, they're so important that we don't need to focus so much on providing a sufficiently high living standard for people to access, healthcare, dental care, these things. It's easier just to provide people with money, and we should respect people to do whatever they like. And this libertarian way of thinking about basic income is, to me, objectionable. We should, as Amartya Sen stresses, we should be concerned with people's freedom to appear in public without shame. This freedom to interact on an equal footing. And for that, we need to look at, if we can actually look on people, we can look at if people have black teeth, if people have dirty clothes, smelly clothes, these are easily interpreted as visible markers of inferior status. We will have divisions between first class and second class citizens. This is inconsistent with this relational way of thinking about equality that I have emphasized. So many of the objections to basic income that I would consider as the most important ones are actually not moral objections, but political objections, objections about feasibility. So for me, it's crucial to not to lose our sense of the wider picture. We need to look for a level of basic income that is socially meaningful and economically feasible without replacing too much of the traditional welfare state. So for me, it's not appealing with this more lower level libertarian form of basic income. As a replacement of many social services that we take for granted in the Nordic context. This is something that many find appealing in the American context. For instance, Charles Murray has this book called In Our Hands, where you think that a low basic income is much better. It's an alternative to the welfare state. And one of the most challenging tasks for basic income research has been to find the right trade-off here between these objectives. And that is one reason why I find this Finnish, the planned pilots, all this investigation that goes into exploring specific policy proposals in the Nordic context so exciting and important. Because at least in the past, it's been very difficult to define a form of basic income that would both be socially meaningful and economically feasible. So a quick way out, there are some easy solutions. We can have a basic income with a very sharp withdrawal rate as income from other sources is added. That would be affordable, but it's not attractive considering the recognitional basis of self-respect, the importance of being able to participate in society, of being able to combine the basic income with job incomes in a flexible way. So that would be affordable, but it would not be very socially meaningful when assessed from this wider set of egalitarian objectives that I have described here. And we should not regard the basic income. We could fund a basic income would be affordable to have a basic income by removing high quality daycare, university, subsidized university, all of these things. But that's not appealing either if we want to establish this foundation for interaction on an equal footing where people can interact without having to bow and scrape. So the very final thing I want to stress, and I want to say one more thing about political strategy and also relating to the Nordic context. The final thing I want to stress has to do with this way of arguing for universalism in the Nordic context as a path for building stable alliances between low and middle income groups. There is this concern in many writings on the universal welfare state and in Nordic interpretations of universalism that the poor must not stand alone. Welfare to the poor is poor welfare is a common expression. That the welfare state, if we want this to be stable, to be legitimate, to support the prospects of the least advantaged in the long run, we need to make sure that a wide group of citizens, wide categories of citizens have a strong commitment to the welfare state. They benefit directly from it. We go to the same hospitals, we our children in the same kind of daycare institutions, the same schools, but we also get adequate income support, income protection from the state. This has been a strong argument for universalism in the past. And so there is this worry, and a worry that I share, at least I think it's very important to address when talking about specific concrete models of basic income, that we should not think about this as a replacement of social services, that I said before, but also there are reasons not to think about it as a replacement for income-related social insurance, because that might imply that we're actually eroding the power foundations of the welfare state, that the legitimacy of the welfare state, this notion of strong universalism, the strong level of support will gradually deteriorate, that will replace this ambitious welfare state with something far less ambitious, that concern only with providing some level of basic security, and then people can top it up with private insurance and things like that. But if we move in that direction, this objection will be important, that we might easily end up with a situation where we have the net contributors and we have net recipients in these distinct categories. And so those who contribute, who are funding this system, will talk about those people over there, the poor people taking our money, rather than regarding the welfare state as a concern for all citizens. Okay, so I'll stop there and invite you to ask questions or share your reflections on this topic. Thank you very much.